All right, so we are recording this call. I know you have that. You were going to say that later, but since we're right at the beginning, I'll go ahead and say it. So welcome, everybody. It looks like we have a great audience here. My name is Joe Griffiths. I'm the Local Assistance and Training Manager for the Maryland Department of Planning. I also emailed many of you to share this information and let you know about this meeting, and then Deb followed up. I know some of those were, you might have received an email from my email forwarded to you, but I'm the one that initiated at least this discussion. So I'm just going to introduce this briefly and then turn it over to the experts. The Maryland Department of Planning strives to develop mapping products that can be beneficial to our local, regional, and state partners. But we really rely on all of you to help us create the most accurate mapping layers. That's why you're here today, and that's why we contacted you. We really appreciate your time reviewing our drafts and providing feedback, because that's the only way that they're going to be the quality that we want to pursue, but also the quality we think will be most beneficial to you. Our Geospatial Data Analysis Division, which Deb is in, supported by our regional planners and other staff members such as Scott Hansen, who you'll hear from later this morning, have spent the past few years updating some of our most requested mapping layers. These are generalized zoning and the statewide land use. We published the generalized zoning layer late last year. And we thank everybody who provided feedback and QA/QC both on the tables for the generalized zoning, but also the map. And now we're trying to finalize the land use layer, which is why we're here today. Both layers are available or made available to help you with your planning needs, such as that for comprehensive planning, development capacity analyses, and land preservation, or anything else that you might find them beneficial. So it's a partnership here, and we really hope that these products can be of use to you. So we hope you find this training informative, and we look forward to your questions and feedback. And now I'm going to turn it over to Deb. So thank you all for being here.
Great, thanks very much, Joe. So as Joe said, my name is Deb Sword, and I work with the Geospatial Data and Analysis Unit at the Maryland Department of Planning. And I wanted to just go over a couple of quick housekeeping items before I start the presentation. So as Joe mentioned, the webinar is going to be recorded for reviewers who are not able to make it today, and we'll be posting it to the webpage for reviewers that you received from either Joe or myself. So just so that anyone who couldn't make it today is able to still receive the same training information. And as Joe mentioned, this is a follow-up to the email you received inviting you to review our updated draft statewide land use map for the Eastern Shore. And we're processing the data regionally, and we'll add the Western Shore for review also once it finishes going through our internal QA/QC process. So Scott Hansen from our team has set up an interactive web application that will allow you to place your comments on the draft map interactively. So we hope that will be helpful. And during the training, he's going to walk everyone through the logistics of placing those comment points. And then to facilitate your review, I'm also going to provide a little bit of background on our map and how we created it, and some changes that we made since 2010 that will hopefully facilitate your review. We welcome any and all feedback on the map and methods. And our goal is to incorporate as many suggestions as we can if they're consistent with our statewide classification scheme. And then just a reminder that we're requesting comments on the Eastern Shore and general methodology by March 8th. And then lastly, just a reminder, since the data are in draft format, we're just asking that folks not share the webpage of the data beyond the teams that are reviewing the draft map and on behalf of your agencies. And we ask that it just not be used for any mapping or analysis without permission from MDP. So since we're going to be going through some of the background information up front, we recommend saving questions until after the presentation. I know some folks may not be able to stay on the whole time, so we want to make sure we get through the whole demonstration of how to place the comment points and background on the map. And then after that point, if you all want to add questions to the chat box, or if you want to raise your hand and just chime in, Joe offered to help moderate the session for that. So we look forward to hearing you during Q&A. We built in lots of time for it after the presentation. And then if your agency would like to speak with us about questions that are specific to your jurisdiction or your area of expertise, we're also happy to set up a separate meeting with you. So I'll have my contact information up there in case you want to reach out after the meeting. So,
hey, Deb, I do have one question real quick. Sorry.
Sure.
You didn't put this AI note taker on here, did you, intentionally?
No, I didn't. But is that something that we should manually remove?
Yeah, if it's not intentional, we're supposed to remove it.
Okay.
remove it from the call. It has
Okay,
my
great.
name, so I'm just gonna remove it.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the catch, Joe. Appreciate that. All right, so while Joe's doing that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So anyway, I just wanted to say I appreciate everyone who's reached out to me about this project and for your interest and all the feedback that we've received so far. For anyone who's not familiar with this product, this is an update to our statewide land use map. As you can see, it's a map showing the general location of residential, commercial, industrial, institutional, and other developed lands statewide. And the last update was completed in 2010. A couple of ways that the map has been used. We've seen it used in local comprehensive plans to show the existing land use distribution or map land use changes. It's been used for pollutant loading analyses to show, to estimate how much load is occurring by land use into the Chesapeake Bay. It's been used in conjunction with development capacity analysis, for example, to see where development pressure or capacity exists in rural areas and target land preservation efforts accordingly. And then it's also been used for transportation planning. So things like seeing where trips might be generated from, or NEPA analysis that might map, for example, the potential land use impacts of a transportation project. So historically, our map has been divides the landscape into two areas. So there's the urban or developed areas, and then the remaining undeveloped resource land. Within the urban developed classifications, we have residential lands along with the other developed lands I mentioned before. And within that residential category, it goes from very low density residential areas that have lot sizes between 5 and 20 acres, all the way up to the high density residential areas, which are like the townhomes and beginning with townhomes and garden apartments, and basically 8 dwelling units or more per acre. And one thing I just wanted to note is that in 2010, MDP mapped a lot of these rural subclassifications that are circled in red here. Ever since 2010, the Chesapeake Bay program has done a comprehensive mapping effort to map these rural subcategories. So rather than reinventing the wheel, we're going to defer to them for these areas and remove these rural and undeveloped subclassifications going forward, making sure we're adding value rather than duplicating efforts. So since I mentioned the Chesapeake Bay program data, I just wanted to clarify how our land use map differs from the Chesapeake Bay program's land use and land cover map. I know some of you may be familiar with the Bay program's land use land cover data, but for folks who haven't seen it yet, our draft map is showing up on the left here. It's a residential subdivision, low density, showing up in yellow. On the right-hand side is the Chesapeake Bay program's map, and you can see that a lot of those parcels that are coded as residential in our map, on the right-hand side, you see a lot more detail about specific land use and land cover types within those parcels, such as the exact locations of structures and impervious surface, turf grass, forests, and things like that. Another difference is the way that we kind of conceptualize development for our map. So our map is a little bit more of a kind of a land conversion map. It shows where the land has been subdivided and built, showing generalized like residential areas. The Bay program map looks at different categories of land use and classifies those as developed regardless of where they're located on the landscape. So for instance, in a very large parcel that maybe 20 acres or more, if there's a piece of, and maybe there's a single family home on it, if there's a piece of impervious surface on that, that piece of impervious surface will be classified as developed in the Chesapeake Bay program's data set. But in our data set, that's going to be considered part of the rural or undeveloped landscape because it's still kind of more of a rural land use. So a couple of differences between the two maps. You can see on the left side, I've hatched where the Bay program's developed land uses overlap ours. There is a significant amount of overlap, but it's not exactly the same. So we just want folks to keep that in mind and recognize that there may be different use cases for these two data sets, and we hope that both will be very useful for local planning. So I just wanted to briefly go over a couple of the input data sets we use for our analysis. So we have GIS parcel polygons attributed with tax assessment data. Those parcel polygons are now available for the first time statewide since the 2010 map update. We also have the new Chesapeake Bay program high resolution land use and land cover map. We're supplementing that also with county and municipal land use data where available, the 2010 land use land cover map, and other ancillary data to help with our classifications. And due to the availability of the first two inputs, which is new since 2010, we're making some methodology updates just to bring our map up to speed with new data and technology. So having those GIS parcel polygons in the Bay program high resolution data allows us to kind of automate and standardize a lot of this map statewide for the first time. We're also reducing some generalization. So before the GIS parcel polygons were available, the map was more digitized over, like hand digitized over aerial imagery. So there might be like general residential areas and other parcels that were kind of lumped into those residential areas and classified as residential. Now with the parcel polygons, we want to really tie those land uses to the parcels so that we can monitor those parcel attributes for change over time. So you may see some areas that were previously a little bit more generalized, and now there's a little bit more detail about different land uses within those areas, even if nothing has changed on the landscape since 2010. Which brings me to my other point that because of some of these methodology updates, the map's not yet going to be comparable to the 2010 land use land cover map, and that will be something that we visit at a future date. As I mentioned before, we're going to focus primarily on mapping urban land uses instead of the rural subclassifications. And we're mapping those as of 2018 because the currently published high resolution land use land cover from the Bay program is also 2018, and that's a very important input into our map. So we want to kind of match that same data vintage with our map as well, and then ensure that future updates are consistent as well. Also, in the 2010 map, you may have noticed that the roadway network was primarily highways, but now since we have more data available for rights of way between parcels and impervious roads, we're going to map the whole roadway network within that transportation classification. And then finally, we're going to further generalize very low density residential uses, which I'll talk about a little bit more on a subsequent slide that has some pictures. So I just wanted to give a brief overview of our process. There's a lot of methodology documentation on the web page that you received. So if you want to dig in a little bit more, there's more detail about some of the thresholds and other details of our methodology. But just for a general sense, to classify all the parcels in the state, first we had to distinguish between parcels that contain development and parcels that don't. So for the purposes of our map, developed lands included parcels that have urban improvements that are associated with structures or impervious surfaces as of 2018. So that's typically done by looking at the tax assessment data and seeing what kind of commercial industrial use codes or building information identifies or pinpoints an urban use on the property. We also included parking areas. So for example, common elements around condominiums, parks and open spaces also get classified as developed, at least the most intensely used parts of them, which I'll get to a little bit later slide, and then extractive areas. Undeveloped lands, on the other hand, include parcels that have no improvements on them that don't qualify as parks or open spaces. Rural parcels that don't have any urban improvements. So for example, if a parcel might have a structure on it of some kind, but maybe it's a chicken house or something like that. So there's an improvement, but it's associated with a rural use. So we tried to identify those by looking at parcels that have an agricultural use assessment and parcels that have a poultry house. And then there are single family residential parcels that are greater than or equal to 20 acres. So these don't meet the classification for residential because the parcel size is too big. Those are generally folded into the rural landscape for the purposes of this specific map. So there are a couple areas on the map that are a little trickier to classify. On the right, I mentioned we're kind of looking for deferring to feedback on these. So there are other parcels that contain significant structures or impervious, but maybe they don't have any coding for tax assessment purposes. So it's a little bit more tricky if they don't neatly fall into one of those developed or undeveloped categories. And for those, we are kind of looking to the 2010 map and any other available local data to try to figure out if those are developed or not. So once we classify all the parcels in the state, we then have kind of a complex algorithm that draws on multiple data sources to figure out what the classification should be. With these parcel classifications, I just wanted to point out that in generally, we kind of want to use these standard definitions for developed versus undeveloped going forward, but we do, with the review process, we definitely have some flexibility. Like if we misclassified something as residential that should be commercial, or we missed a park or something like that, we can definitely reclassify within this kind of schema, those parcels kind of on a one-by-one basis, individual manual corrections. So I see that based on the web application so far that some of you have already been putting in some really helpful comments and suggesting different classifications, and some of you have put comments in there about why you think it should be classified as something different. And I just want to point out that those comments have been extremely helpful. So we really appreciate that. And with these classifications, one thing we notice at MDP is that it's a little bit difficult to figure out what a classification should be just looking at the aerial imagery. So we recommend that if folks aren't really sure if it's wrong or not sure what the classification should be, you may not want to recommend a correction unless you're sure, just because a lot of times we would look at it and 5 different people might have 5 different suggestions just looking at the aerial imagery, because it can be a little hard to make the distinction between like what's an undeveloped lot versus like an area that's set aside for open space, for instance. Okay, so after we classify all the parcels in the state, our next step is to generate the statewide land use map. So unlike the parcel classification process where we're kind of making some manual corrections to the parcels that are consistent with our classification scheme, this part of the map is done using Python scripting or model rules that are kind of consistent statewide. So I'll go over these in a bit more detail, but I just wanted to point out that with these, we may not be making individual manual edits to the map just to maintain that statewide consistency and kind of manageability of the data. So if you see errors related to any of these things, it may be worth kind of like pointing out a couple key examples, or if you see an example that's particularly significant, like maybe if a row of townhome or like a block of townhomes was accidentally misclassified as very low density based on data, you may want to point out something like that. But I just wanted to clarify that for this section, we may have to work on improving our model rules over time, and may not, for all of these, may not always be able to make an individual manual edit. So I'll go through these really briefly. So once we have all the parcels classified in the state, we then take all the single family residential parcels and generalize them into one of those density classifications based on their lot sizes. We then superimpose water and impervious roads from the Chesapeake Bay Program's land use and land cover data set. We also superimpose historical extractive areas from the 2010 data set, as well as the active extractive areas from the Bay Program's land use land cover onto the map. So because of this, you may see a couple parcels where there's more than one land use in there and extractive use and something else, because they don't always necessarily follow parcel boundaries. We also use the Bay Program's data to determine the extent of development particularly on very large parcels. And then finally, we fold those long utility easements and rail lines into their surrounding uses, since they don't have their own classification for the purposes of this map. So just to illustrate a little bit of what that looks like. So on the left-hand side, we have all the classified parcels, and you can see that the single family residential parcels are all in yellow, just one color. And then once we create the statewide land use map, those areas are generalized into those different density groups, from the very low density in the tan all the way up to the high density in the brown. And so we also superimpose I should mention with the density, we're generally keeping the same densities for each parcel as the 2010 land use map, unless there's been like new development on the parcel or like within the immediate vicinity of those parcels. So then density gets reevaluated. And then also you can see here how we've superimposed the water as well as the road network on top of these. And we know that folks who may not have comments on individual parcel classifications may have comments on some of these statewide rules, and we'll definitely show you how to have a more open-ended comment as part of the comment process shortly when Scott does his presentation. Okay, so I did want to mention that when we generalize density, we're doing something a little bit different this time around with the very low density residential. So these are both the shaded red areas, or sorry, hatched red areas, are all parcels with a single family residence on them according to the assessment data that have sizes between 5 and 20 acres. So they theoretically could qualify for the very low density residential category. But based on some stakeholder feedback, we're interested in making sure we classify the ones on the left as very low density residential, because they're kind of part of areas that have been subdivided and built and converted from rural to more of an urban use. On the right-hand side, some of these are supporting agricultural uses and still kind of part of that rural landscape. So what we're hoping to do is generalize out parcels that look like the one on the right, and make sure we include as very low density residential the types of parcels that you see on the left. So we're using some clustering techniques as part of our model to do that. So I just wanted to point that out because that was something a little bit new since 2010. And then lastly, to determine the developed extent, we use the Chesapeake Bay program's land use and land cover. So you can see here, there are a couple larger parcels on the left side. In red, there's a commercial airport on the right side. In blue, there's an institution, but you can see that both of these parcels are very large, and they have either a lot of agricultural land or a lot of forest with them. So on these parcels that are bigger than 5 acres, we're using the Bay program's land use and land cover data sets to remove some of those undeveloped parts of the larger parcels so that only the developed portions of those are showing. You can see with the smaller parcels that are 5 acres or less and have a structure on them, we're filling out the whole parcel for those. But I just wanted to point this out because there might be a case, for example, if we've classified a parcel as a park or open space, which is a developed use, but let's say the entire thing is wooded, there's no impervious or structures on it. We may have classified it as parks or open space in that first step, but you may not see any of that parks or open space on the landscape simply because maybe there's no impervious or structures there. So I just wanted to point that out as well. Okay, so just in terms of next steps, so after this, Scott's going to demonstrate how to add comment points to the app. Comments on the Eastern Shore are due March 8th. MDP is going to review all your feedback and then make the revisions that we can make after we release. After that, we'll release this map as a beta version for public use and additional feedback. This is kind of the first time that we're attempting to align these land uses to parcels and given the new data that are available to us. So we definitely want to release it as a kind of a beta or test version to get additional feedback. So if there's any feedback we can't incorporate before the beta version, we'll try to continue working on improving our modeling for subsequent versions. And kind of along those lines, there are a couple areas for further exploration. And these are kind of long-term areas. So we're interested in any ideas that you all may have for how we can kind of maintain this data collaboratively with you if you're interested. And then I mentioned, I think in previous presentations, that there are a couple areas in this map that we didn't revisit since 2010. So for example, extractive areas, we use the historical extractive data from the 2010 land use map. But if anyone has expertise on extractive areas and would like us help us to kind of update that coverage or has comments, we are definitely interested in that. We don't have a separate solar classification. So right now in this map, solar fields are kind of classified according to whatever they are in the tax assessment attributes, and may be classified differently depending on that. So definitely interested in if folks have ways they'd like to see solar fields represented on this map, like as a separate overlay or any ideas you may have. We certainly welcome that feedback. And then finally, this map doesn't have like a mixed use category associated with it. So usually those areas are either going to be categorized as commercial or high density residential. So and then finally, I mentioned this map is not comparable to our 2010 land use map. So we want to explore kind of creating this baseline and be able to assess change over time in the future. So I think that's all I had. I'm going to go ahead and oh, one more thing, I'm sorry. So I just wanted to mention that when you go to enter the web application to place your comments, we recommend always entering the web application through the landing page that you received in the email. And that's just in case we have to change any links to any of the documents there or the web application itself. You'll always have access to the latest version if you enter this way. And on that web page, if you haven't been there already, it includes what links not only to the application, but also to our classification definitions, which may be helpful for your review, a more detailed methodology information. And then we also are asking folks to register as a reviewer before reviewing the map, either through the web map or the GIS, just because that way we know who we're expecting comments from. And then if we have any questions on your comments, we can match those up and with a name and follow up with you with any of our questions. So we appreciate that. You can also, when you're registering as a reviewer, if you prefer to review the map using the GIS data instead of on the interactive web map, if you check the box that you want to use GIS, I'll add you to our Microsoft team, which is kind of just a file FTP site for downloading the data. You'll receive a within a couple days, you should receive a link to set up a free Teams account if you don't have one already, and then you'll be able to access our team and download files from the File tab. So I think that's all I have. I'll just turn it over to Scott Hansen, who's going to demo the app briefly, and then we'll do questions after that.
Thank you, Deborah. Let me just
I'll let you share.
Share my screen here. Can you all make out the screen?
I can see
Okay,
it.
and you might want to zoom in a little bit, Scott. Or maybe you're already planning on doing that, but.
Okay, so I just want to take this opportunity to provide a demonstration on how to use this Maryland statewide land use review application. So first I'll walk through some of the functionality, and then we'll do the dropping the comment point. And I'm glad to see that there are many points in here, so it's definitely being utilized, which is awesome. First, how to browse the map. You can browse the map in two ways. First, you can access the search tool by clicking on the magnifying glass in the upper top right of the map pane, and you can select a address. So here I'm just going to enter in an address. And you'll have a list of addresses, and you can select it, and you'll go right to the particular location. The second option is simply using your mouse scroll wheel and zooming in and out, and then left click, and then panning around the map. So we've got two options of how to navigate the map. Pretty simple, but I want to make sure we covered that. Next, how to resize a pane. We've got a lot of information here. We've got a help area over to the left. And if it is easier on your desktop or your mobile device, if you want to resize this to make it easier to read, you simply get your mouse cursor and you click on the border, and then you pull in the direction of the arrows. And this can be done for any of these areas. We call them widgets. It is very helpful as well when we get into the legend pane, which we'll look at in a little bit. Next, how to turn on a map layer. Really important, right? So two options. In the map pane, the top right corner, we call it a sandwich or the layer icon. And if you hover over it, it'll give you the name of the icon. Select the layer tab, which is right here, and then select the layer of interest. And there's an icon of an image of an eye, which provides visibility. So if you click, there'll be a line through it if it is hidden, or if you click it, the line will be removed. And you can see here the municipal boundary, which is a red outline. By just simply clicking the layer, you can see it turn on and off. The second option is in the bottom right legend pane, you can select the layer by clicking on the checkbox to the left of the layer. So if I come down here to the lower portion, click on the checkbox, and again, municipal boundaries outlined in red will be on, and we can simply turn it off. The map contains comment points, municipal boundary, parcel boundaries, draft land use map, and as Deborah mentioned, the 2018 NAEP high resolution imagery. Please note the land use map matches the existing land use conditions as of 2018. So we have this layer as well that can be turned on, and when you zoom in, we'll provide aerial imagery information for you. Next, how to adjust a layer transparency. In the bottom right legend pane, select a layer by clicking the checkbox to the left of the layer. Then click three dots to increase or decrease the transparency. So that you can actually, you can click up and increase, or you can click down and decrease. And you'll notice in the map, the municipal boundary, the red outline, fading in and out. Next, how to view map layer information in a pop-up. To view map layer information in a pop-up, turn on the map layers of interest using the layer tool. So we can come up here to the sandwich or layer icon. And we've got common points turned on, parcel boundaries turned on, and the draft land use map turned on. Next, zoom to the parcel or parcels of interest using the magnifying glass or by using your mouse scroll wheel. So I'm going to use my mouse scroll wheel. Simply zoom in. Click on the parcel and a pop-up box will appear for the selected map layer or layers that you want to examine. If there are additional map layers, then you can use arrow keys left or right to navigate between the pop-up information for each layer. This layer has one data element, so there's only one here. The home button will take you back to the full extent of the view, which is the Eastern Shore. And now we're going to look at how to view the map legend. To access the map legend, go back to the upper right icon of the layer or the sandwich, just below the magnifying glass, and then click on the Legend tab. You can also view the map legend information in the bottom right legend pane. So if we come down here, click the 3 lines next to each layer to view the legend. So we'll go down to the draft land use map and we'll click the 3 lines. And we can do a little bit of scrolling to take a look at all the different the symbols and the different classifications. And as I showed earlier too, feel free to navigate to move these. It's a really nice, I think, an easy way to, based on your screen resolution, to make things a little bit easier to see. Now we're going to go into how to add additional data to the map. To add additional data, there's basically 3 ways to do it. I'm going to walk you through each of the ways. We have a way that we can search for data, we can add it via a URL, or we can add an existing file that you may have on your desktop. So let's start off with looking at the data search capability. Use the Click to Add Data button at the bottom of the left pane. In this option, we can either pull in information from ArcGIS Online or the Living Atlas. And if you are logged in as a member of an ArcGIS Online account, you will have other options as well. We can select ArcGIS Online, and I can just write in here just populating it with Maryland Legislative District. And we have something from elected officials from MDI map. We'll select that. We'll click done. And the second step is to come over here now and make sure that that layer is loaded into the map. So we go click on the 4 circles, which is actions, and we add this to the map. We can come over here now and we can adjust transparency, as I showed earlier, by simply clicking increase transparency. Please note, any data added to the map is available only for the current browser session, and that this information does not get saved permanently in the application. So if you close out, you come back in 2 hours, you load the app up again, you will not see these layers in the application. This is just for the browser session. Next, how to add information using the URL. So we're going to come over here and we're going to delete using the trash can icon. We're going to go back to Click to Add Data. And we're going to go to the URL. So if someone sends you a link, we're going to actually use the sample URL below, but we've got many options from an ArcGIS server web service to OGC web services, KML, CSV, or GeoJSON. There's actually others as well, depending on if you are an ArcGIS Online user. We got a lot of options to add in. We're simply going to copy the example from below for this demonstration. Once the URL is populated, click the Add button, click Done. You'll notice in the lower add data widget that we have world cities showing up. We'll click the 4 circles, which is the action icon, and we'll add that to the map. And now we've added a data layer. This is outside the extent of this analysis, but still very simple to do, and it leverages information already out on the Living Atlas or ArcGIS Online or any other areas. We're going to simply remove that, and we're going to turn off the world cities and go back to the study area extent. For the third way to add information before we start on how to add a comment point, we can add additional data using a file. So in the lower left, click Add Data, navigate to File, click on the drop or browse to upload, and you'll note that there are many options to upload a shapefile, a CSV, a KML file, or a GeoJSON. Hopefully you will be able to see my window pop up here. When sharing a screen, I'm not sure how it behaves. I'm selecting a Maryland water bodies, a zipped file that I pulled off of Maryland IMAP. Select it, click Open. It will upload the entire folder. You do not have to upload individual files, which is really nice. Select Done. You will notice that in this case, the rivers and stream generalized by USGS has loaded. We will click the action button or the 4 circles icon, and we will add to map. And there you have it. Very simple. I wanted to make sure that we went through all the ways to add information. And now, I think one of the most important features is how to drop that comment point, how to add your comment point. Basically, there are 3 steps. First, confirm that the comment points in the parcel boundaries layers are turned on. And if you want, you can also have the Maryland NAIP imagery on as well. In the editor menu in the upper right, under Create Features, select the comment point. So this is our editor menu. And actually, I'm sorry, let me just reload this real quick. This is the editor menu, and under Create Features, we're going to select a comment point to activate this. You will now see click on Map to add a point. The second step, with comment points selected, zoom in until the parcel boundaries are visible, and then click on the map to add a point within the intended parcel boundary. So I just want to encourage everyone not to drop a point at this particular map extent. You're going to want to zoom in, and you're going to want to take a look at, make sure your point is within the intended parcel. So we simply click. And then the third step is providing the information. So once a point is added to the map, suggest parcel classification changes using the proposed LU or land use correction drop-down menu. So come over here and drop down. And I'm just going to put in, for example, maybe a multifamily. And then I'm going to drop a comment. And this comment field can be used to describe an error that cannot be addressed through the proposed LU correction dropdown. So if just put something, please verify. And then you can put your name, and your name should be, the reviewer name should be exactly as entered on the reviewer registration form that was mentioned earlier. So here we go, and then you click Create to save your comment point. If you want to go back, there is a back arrow up top, which you can discard your edit if you make a mistake or you want to do a change. So those are the 3 steps. We've taken the effort, great care to make it as simple as possible. Please reach out with any questions. My contact information, my email is scott.hansen@maryland.gov. And I think Deborah has more information on how to get a hold of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Scott. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen again just so that our contact information is showing up in case anyone wants to contact us after the webinar. And before we move on to Q&A, I just wanted to add one quick point to Scott's presentation. So during my presentation, I mentioned that sometimes it can be a little challenging to figure out what a parcel classification should be, so that so if you know what we don't want to discourage any comments. So if you think something looks a little strange or you're not quite sure, there's always that open-ended comment field available to you if you're not sure what the classification should be, or if you're not sure if it's really an error. Whereas the drop down can be used if you're sure, like there's a if you're sure you know what the correction should be. So I'm going to go ahead and just share the screen real quick so you have our contact information. Okay, and then I think we're happy to take any questions that you all may have. And you can either type them into the chat or raise your hand.